In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council's archives, buried beneath layers of classified documents and protected by quantum encryption that would take 1,000 years to crack, lies a single file marked with the highest security clearance possible: Species Containment Protocol, Earth Designation Homo sapiens. The file contains no weapon specifications, no military strategies, no technological blueprints. Instead, it holds something far more terrifying to the galaxy's established order: a collection of historical records, psychological evaluations, and a single chilling conclusion that keeps the Council's most powerful beings awake during their rest cycles. The conclusion reads, "Under no circumstances should the species designation human be permitted to engage in organized warfare beyond their home system, not because they lack the capability to win, but because they lack the capability to stop." What follows is the true story of how a relatively young species from a backwater planet in the Orion Arm became the galaxy's most feared potential threat, not through superior technology, not through ancient wisdom, but through something far more dangerous: their fundamental inability to understand when a war should end. This is the account of why the galaxy learned to fear not human strength, but human persistence. Not their weapons, but their refusal to yield. Not their intelligence, but their terrifying creativity when pushed to the brink of extinction. The records that follow were compiled from the testimonies of survivors, the analysis of xenopsychologists, and the desperate reports of military commanders who faced humanity in battle and lived to warn others never to make the same mistake. Because in a galaxy where warfare is a calculated political tool with clear objectives and reasonable conclusions, humans brought something unprecedented: the concept of total war, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat as anything other than a temporary setback. We thought we were teaching them a lesson. We discovered they'd been teaching themselves one for millennia. That survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being the last one standing when everyone else has given up. Final report of Admiral Zekthor of the Hegemony Fleet, before the Treaty of Mandatory Peace was signed. The diplomatic chamber aboard the Galactic Council station, Harmony's Rest, had hosted thousands of first contact ceremonies over the millennia. The vast circular room, with its crystalline walls that shifted color to match the emotional resonance of its occupants, had witnessed the formal introduction of species ranging from the silicon-based crystallites of Vega Prime to the energy beings of the Nebula Collective. Each ceremony followed the same ancient protocols, established eons ago to ensure peaceful integration of new civilizations into the galactic community. Today felt different. Ambassador Veltar of the Andromedian Hegemonia adjusted his ceremonial robes, the living fabric responding to his nervous energy by shifting from its usual deep purple to a mottled grey. As the Council's primary xenologist and chief diplomatic officer, he had overseen more first contacts than any being currently alive. Yet, something about the approaching human delegation unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. The preliminary reports had been unusual. The species calling themselves humans had achieved faster-than-light travel only recently, barely 50 Earth years ago. By galactic standards, they were technological infants. Most species required millennia to develop the sophisticated understanding of quantum mechanics necessary for interstellar travel. The humans had apparently stumbled upon it through what their own scientists described as trial and error combined with stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible. "Ambassador," came the melodic voice of his aide Lyrian, whose species communicated primarily through harmonic frequencies. "The human vessel has docked. They're requesting permission to bring their full diplomatic contingent." "How many?" Veltar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Most species sent 3 to 5 representatives for first contact. The energy beings sent just one. The hive-minded Zephyrians needed only their queen speaker. 47. Veltar's head tentacles twitched involuntarily. 47 individuals? For a first contact ceremony? "Yes, Ambassador. They've identified themselves as representatives from different geopolitical regions of their homeworld. They insisted that no single human could speak for their entire species, as they appear to lack any unified global government." This was unprecedented. Every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy had achieved unity before reaching the stars. It was considered a basic requirement for technological advancement. How could a fractured species develop faster than light travel while still maintaining separate nations? "Very well," Veltar sighed, his ceremonial robe shifting to a resigned brown. "Activate the full chamber protocols. And Lyrian, alert the Council's security forces. Not as a threat assessment, but as a precautionary measure." The massive doors to the diplomatic chamber began their slow, ceremonial opening. The tradition dictated that first contact should be a moment of profound dignity, where new civilizations could appreciate the majesty and wisdom of the galactic community they were joining. The first human through the door immediately ruined that atmosphere. "Holy shit," said the human, stopping dead in his tracks as he stared up at the chamber's soaring ceiling. "Would you look at the size of this place?" The human delegation that followed seemed equally impressed, but their reactions varied wildly. Some stood in respectful silence, others pointed excitedly at various features of the chamber, and one began what appeared to be some sort of recording device, speaking rapidly into it in a language that the universal translator struggled to parse. Veltar studied them with growing confusion. The humans appeared to be bipedal mammals, roughly similar in structure to a dozen other species in the galaxy. They were clearly intelligent, given their technological achievements, but their behavior suggested a chaotic, undisciplined approach to formal diplomacy that made him deeply uncomfortable. The human who had spoken first approached the ceremonial podium where Veltar waited. He was a tall specimen with dark skin and close-cropped hair, wearing what appeared to be a formal military uniform decorated with colorful ribbons and insignia. "Ambassador Veltar, I presume?" the human said, extending his right hand in what their cultural briefings had indicated was a gesture of greeting. "General Marcus Williams, United Nations Space Command. It's an honor to meet you, sir." Veltar carefully extended one of his upper tentacles to make contact with the human's hand, as protocol demanded. The moment of contact sent an unusual sensation through his nervous system, something his species experienced only when touching particularly strong-willed beings. "The honor is mine, General Williams," Veltar replied, speaking through the chamber's translation systems. "The Council welcomes humanity to the galactic community. We trust your journey was pleasant?" "Bit of turbulence in the Centauri system, but nothing our pilots couldn't handle," Williams replied with what the cultural briefing had identified as a smile, apparently a positive expression among humans. "I have to say, this station is impressive. Our engineers are probably having heart attacks trying to figure out how you built something this size." "Engineers?" Veltar's confusion deepened. "General, forgive me, but are there military personnel among your delegation?" "About half of us." "Yes, sir," Williams replied matter-of-factly. "The other half are diplomats, scientists, and cultural representatives. We figured it was important to bring people who could speak to all the different aspects of humanity." This violation of protocol sent a ripple of concern through the assembled council members. Military personnel were never included in first contact ceremonies. The very presence of warriors suggested a species that viewed the galaxy through the lens of potential conflict rather than cooperative opportunity. "I see," Veltar managed. "Perhaps we should proceed with the formal ceremony?" "If you would direct your delegation to the designated areas," what followed was unlike any first contact in galactic history. Instead of the traditional solemn procession and formal presentations, the humans scattered throughout the chamber with undisguised curiosity. Their scientists immediately began examining the crystal walls. Their diplomats engaged in animated conversations with any council member willing to speak with them, and their military personnel maintained a subtle but noticeable defensive formation while studying the chamber's exits and potential threats. The formal presentation portion of the ceremony proved equally chaotic. Rather than a single spokesperson delivering prepared remarks about their species' values and intentions, the humans insisted on having multiple representatives speak about different aspects of their civilization. Dr. Sarah Chen, identified as a xenobiologist from something called the Beijing Institute, spoke about humanity's scientific achievements and their excitement about learning from other species. Her presentation was methodical and impressive, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of advanced concepts despite their species' relative youth. President Elena Vasquez of the South American Federation discussed human political philosophy, which seemed to revolve around concepts of individual freedom and democratic representation that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. The idea that leaders should be chosen by popular vote rather than through demonstrated competence or inherited authority struck many as dangerously chaotic, but it was the presentation by Colonel James Mitchell that truly alarmed the Council. "Our military history," Mitchell began, "is essentially the history of our species. We've been fighting wars for as long as we've existed, and those conflicts have driven most of our technological and social development." The chamber fell silent. Several council members shifted nervously in their seats. "Now I want to be clear," Mitchell continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was creating. "We're not here looking for a fight, but we've learned that being prepared for conflict is the best way to prevent it. Our military doctrine is based on the principle that peace is only possible when those who would threaten it understand the cost of aggression." Veltar found himself struggling to maintain diplomatic composure. Colonel, are you suggesting that humanity views military conflict as inevitable? Not inevitable, Mitchell replied with that unsettling human smile. But probable. History shows us that someone always wants what someone else has. The strong take from the weak unless the weak make themselves strong enough to resist. It's not a philosophy we're proud of, but it's one that's kept our species alive and growing for millennia. The implications of this worldview sent a chill through the assembled council members. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had moved beyond such primitive thinking. The very concept of organized violence between spacefaring species was considered a relic of pre-civilization barbarism. After the formal presentations concluded, Veltar called for a recess, ostensibly to allow the humans to tour the station's facilities. In reality, he needed to consult urgently with the council's leadership about what they had just witnessed. The emergency session convened in the council's most secure chamber, protected by quantum encryption and psionic dampening fields that prevented any form of surveillance. They brought soldiers to a diplomatic ceremony, announced Councillor Thekmore of the Regellian Assembly, his carapace clicking with agitation. In 3,000 years of first contact protocols, no species has ever done such a thing. Their entire worldview is based on conflict, added Councillor Zephyra, her gaseous form swirling with distress. They speak of war as if it were a natural law rather than a failure of civilization. Veltar nodded gravely. What concerns me most is their casualness about it. They don't see military thinking as something to be ashamed of or to grow beyond. They see it as practical wisdom. Perhaps, suggested Councillor Orim of the Crystalline Collective, they are simply young. Most species go through a militant phase before achieving true civilization, given time and guidance.
That's what I thought initially, Veltar interrupted.
But their military representative spoke of conflict as an ongoing reality, not a phase to be outgrown. They've achieved interstellar travel while maintaining the mindset of planetary-bound predators. The debate continued for hours, but eventually reached a consensus. Humanity would be granted provisional membership in the galactic community, but with strict limitations on their expansion and military activities. They would be assigned a single solar system as their territorial limit and would be prohibited from establishing military outposts beyond their homeworld. When the council reconvened with the human delegation, Veltar delivered the decision with as much diplomatic grace as he could manage. The council has voted to welcome humanity into the galactic community, he announced. However, given your species' relative youth and unique perspectives on interspecies relations, we believe it would be beneficial to establish certain guidelines for your initial integration. General Williams leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of guidelines, Ambassador? Territorial restrictions primarily. Your species will be granted sovereignty over your home system, but expansion beyond that region will require council approval and supervision. Additionally, military activities beyond your homeworld will be subject to council oversight. The reaction was immediate and telling. The human diplomats looked troubled but resigned. The scientists appeared disappointed but understanding. The military personnel, however, showed expressions that Veltar's cultural briefings identified as anger and suspicion. Ambassador, General Williams said carefully, are you saying that humanity is being confined to a single star system? Think of it as a probationary period, Veltar replied. A chance for your species to demonstrate your commitment to peaceful coexistence before being granted full galactic citizenship. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. When Williams finally spoke, his voice carried an edge that made Veltar's tentacles twitch with unease. I appreciate the Council's concern for galactic stability, Williams said, and I understand that humanity's approach to things might seem unusual compared to other species. But I need to be very clear about something. Humans don't respond well to being caged. This is hardly a cage, General. You have an entire star system at your disposal, with multiple habitable worlds and unlimited resources for development. But it is a limit imposed from outside, Williams replied. And in our experience, limits imposed by others tend to be more about their comfort than our needs. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Veltar realized that this conversation was veering into dangerous territory, but he couldn't understand why. By galactic standards, the Council's offer was extraordinarily generous. Most new species were granted a single planet and perhaps some mining rights in their local asteroid belt. General Williams, Veltar said, hoping to diffuse the situation, surely you can understand the Council's position. Your species has a documented history of violent conflict. We're simply taking reasonable precautions. And surely you can understand ours, Williams replied. Every time in human history that someone has said, "Trust us, these restrictions are for your own good," it's ended with those restrictions being used to prevent growth, development, and self-determination. Doctor. Chen stepped forward, apparently recognizing the need for diplomatic intervention. What General Williams is trying to say is that humans have a cultural aversion to externally imposed limitations. Perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements that address the Council's concerns while respecting humanity's need for autonomous development. But Colonel Mitchell chose that moment to speak up, and his words would be remembered in galactic history as the first warning of what was to come. "With respect, Doctor, but there's no point in dancing around this," Mitchell said, addressing the Council directly. "You're afraid of us. That's fine. Fear is a reasonable response to the unknown, but here's what you need to understand about humans. The fastest way to guarantee conflict with us is to tell us that we can't do something because you're worried about what might happen if we do it." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs from the council members. Such direct language was considered deeply offensive in galactic diplomatic circles. "Colonel Mitchell," President Vasquez hissed, "perhaps we should—" "No, ma'am," Mitchell interrupted. "They need to hear this. Ambassadors, counselors, whatever your titles are, we came here hoping for friendship, partnership, mutual benefit. But if you're starting this relationship by setting limits on human sovereignty based on your fears about human nature, then you're beginning with the assumption that we're your enemies. And humans have a saying, treat someone like an enemy long enough and they'll become one." Veltar felt something he had never experienced in centuries of diplomatic service: genuine fear, not of immediate physical danger, but of something far worse. The realization that the Council might have just made a catastrophic mistake. The humans left the station 12 hours later, after formal diplomatic pleasantries that fooled no one. Their departure was polite, correct, and utterly terrifying in its implications. As Veltar watched their primitive but effective ships disappear into hyperspace, he found himself drafting the first of what would become thousands of reports warning the Council about humanity's true nature. The restriction had been imposed. The response had been noted. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that the galaxy had just made the worst mistake in its recorded history. Because they hadn't been confining humanity to protect the galaxy from humans. They had been confining humans to protect them from themselves. And humans, as they would soon discover, had never learned to accept protection they didn't ask for. 3 standard galactic years had passed since the human delegation's departure from Harmony's Rest, and Veltar had almost convinced himself that his fears had been overblown. The quarterly reports from the monitoring stations positioned around the Sol system showed exactly what the Council had hoped to see. Humanity contained within their designated boundaries, apparently accepting their status as a probationary species. The reports painted a picture of vigorous internal development. Humans had established colonies on 3 additional worlds within their system, built impressive orbital installations around their gas giants, and even begun mining operations in their asteroid belt. Their technological advancement continued at a pace that impressed even the Council's most experienced xenotechnologists. What didn't appear in the reports, what couldn't appear in them, was the conversation taking place in a reinforced bunker 2 kilometers beneath the surface of Mars. "Perimeter scans are complete," reported Admiral Sarah Kim, the compact Korean-American woman who had taken over the United Nations Space Command after Marcus Williams' retirement. "All Council monitoring stations are accounted for. Signal dampening is at maximum. We're clear to proceed." The assembled group represented the most classified military and intelligence organization in human history, the Terran Strategic Planning Division, a joint operation that had formed in the wake of First Contact. Every major Earth government was represented, but political divisions had been set aside for one overriding purpose: ensuring humanity's long-term survival and freedom. "Intelligence summary first," Kim said, nodding to Director Chen Wei of the Combined Intelligence Service. Chen was unrelated to the xenobiologist who had addressed the Council, but shared her methodical approach to problem-solving. "Our deep space reconnaissance has been more successful than projected," Chen began, activating a holographic display that showed the local galactic region. "We've successfully deployed 47 long-range stealth probes beyond the Sol system perimeter. The Council's monitoring technology is impressive, but it's designed to detect conventional FTL signatures. Our quantum tunneling drive systems remain undetectable." The display showed a web of dotted lines extending outward from Sol, reaching dozens of nearby star systems. Each line represented months of careful planning and engineering brilliance that the Council had never suspected humans possessed. "What have we learned?" asked General Patricia Santos, the Brazilian officer who commanded the Terran Defense Force's Strategic Planning Division. The Council wasn't lying about galactic civilization, Chen replied. There are indeed thousands of sentient species spread across the galaxy, and most of them have been at peace for millennia. But that peace comes at a price that I don't think humans are prepared to pay. The display shifted, showing detailed scans of various Council member worlds. What they revealed was stunning in its implications. Take the Andromedan hegemony, for example, Chen continued. Veltar's species, they've achieved perfect social harmony through genetic engineering that removed what they call aggressive tendencies from their population. They literally bred out their capacity for violence, innovation, and individual initiative. They're peaceful because they're incapable of being otherwise. Murmurs of unease rippled through the assembled group. The implications were staggering. The Rigelian Assembly practices something they call consensus thinking, essentially a form of limited telepathic connection that makes individual thought nearly impossible. The crystalline collective is actually a hive mind, not a collection of individuals. The Zephyrians reproduce by merging consciousness, which means personal identity is temporary, at best. Admiral Kim leaned forward. Are you saying that every species in the Council has given up some fundamental aspect of what we would consider sentience in order to achieve peace? Not every species, Chen admitted, but the vast majority. The few that haven't tend to occupy peripheral positions in Council hierarchy and have extremely limited territorial holdings. The correlation is clear. The more peaceful a species becomes by Council standards, the more territory and influence they're granted. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the civilian xenopsychologist who served as the TSPD's cultural advisor. There's something else. Our behavioral analysis of Council species shows patterns consistent with what we might call learned helplessness on a civilizational scale. They've been conditioned to view conflict of any kind as inherently evil and to seek approval from higher authorities before taking any significant action. Domesticated, said General Santos quietly. They've domesticated themselves. The harsh assessment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the room understood its implications. Humanity had been invited to join a galactic community that would require them to abandon everything that made them human. Sir, said Dr. Harp. Reeves, there's more. We've detected at least 3 species that appear to have refused Council integration. They're listed in Council databases as quarantined civilizations, species that were isolated after demonstrating what the Council calls persistent aggressive tendencies. What happened to them? Kim asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Unknown. Their home systems are surrounded by automated defense platforms that prevent any ships from entering or leaving. According to Council records, this is done for the protection of galactic civilization. But it's essentially imprisonment, Kim finished. How long? The oldest quarantine dates back 12,000 standard years. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't being offered a chance at galactic citizenship. They were being given a choice between voluntary domestication and permanent imprisonment. Options? Kim asked, her command voice cutting through the stunned silence. Director Chen activated a new section of the holographic display. We've identified several potential responses. Option 1. Accept the Council's terms and begin the process of cultural modification they'll inevitably demand. Pros. Immediate peace and access to Council technology. Cons. The eventual elimination of everything we consider essentially human. Next. Option 2. Continue our current path of apparent compliance while secretly developing our capabilities. Pros. Buys us time to understand the full scope of the situation. Cons. If discovered, likely results in immediate quarantine. And Option 3? Kim asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Military expansion beyond Council oversight. Establish human presence in unclaimed systems before the Council can respond. Create facts on the ground that make quarantine impractical. General Santos leaned back in her chair. You're talking about war with the entire galaxy. I'm talking about preventing war with the entire galaxy, Chen corrected. Our analysis suggests that the Council's peaceful nature is partly genuine, but it's also partly a result of having overwhelming superiority over any potential dissidents. They've never faced a species that could actually threaten their control. Dr. Reeves nodded grimly. The psychological profiles support this. Council species genuinely can't understand why anyone would choose conflict over submission, because they've been conditioned to see submission as the natural state of intelligent life. They're not evil, but they're also not prepared to deal with a species that fundamentally rejects their worldview. Admiral Kim stood, pacing to a wall display that showed current human military capabilities. What about the fourth option? The one nobody wants to say out loud? The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she meant. Preemptive action, Kim continued. Hit their monitoring stations, their forward bases, their communication networks. Disrupt their ability to coordinate a response while we establish our own territorial presence. Admiral, Dr. Reeves said carefully, that would be an act of unprovoked aggression against peaceful civilizations.
Would it?
Kim turned to face the group. Or would it be a defensive action against a system that intends to imprison or domesticate our entire species? Because from where I sit, those monitoring stations aren't just watching us. They're making sure we stay in our cage. Director Chen activated another display showing detailed tactical analyses of Council military capabilities. Our assessments suggest that Council military doctrine is primarily defensive. Their weapons are designed to contain and isolate rather than destroy. This makes sense given their philosophical approach, but it also creates vulnerabilities. Explained. They're not prepared for total war because they don't believe in total war. Their response to aggression would be to increase isolation and defensive measures, not to launch a counterattack, at least initially. General Santos studied the tactical displays with growing interest. You're saying we might be able to establish territorial control before they could mount an effective response? Possibly, but there's another factor. Chen's expression grew grim. Our deep space probes have detected something else. Ships. Massive ones, with technology signatures that don't match any Council species. They're moving through unclaimed systems, apparently conducting some kind of systematic survey. The tactical display shifted to show the mysterious vessels. They were enormous, clearly designed for long-range operations, and their behavior suggested purpose rather than random exploration. Who are they? Kim asked. Unknown. But their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than anything we've seen from Council species. And Admiral, they're heading toward the Galactic Rim, where Earth is located. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Humanity wasn't just dealing with the Galactic Council that wanted to control them. There was something else out there, something potentially much more dangerous, and the Council either didn't know about it or wasn't sharing that information. How long until they reach our region of space? Kim asked. At their current pace, approximately 15 to 20 standard years. The timeline changed everything. Humanity couldn't afford to spend decades playing political games with the Council while unknown aliens approached their territory. They needed space, resources, and strategic depth to defend themselves against whatever was coming. Recommendations? Kim asked. Director Chen took a deep breath. Modified Option 3. Begin covert territorial expansion immediately, but maintain diplomatic relations with the Council. Establish human presence in unclaimed systems while continuing to appear compliant. If discovered, claim the expansion as defensive preparation against the unknown vessels. And if the Council doesn't accept that explanation, then we implement full Option 3. But by that point, we'll hopefully have enough territorial presence to make quarantine impractical. Doctor, Reeves raised a concerned hand. Admiral, this path almost certainly leads to conflict with the Council eventually. Are we prepared for the consequences? Kim's expression hardened. Doctor, I've been asking myself that question for 3 years, and I keep coming back to the same answer. The consequences of submission are worse than the consequences of conflict. At least if we fight, we'll face whatever comes as humans. If we submit, our children will face it as something else entirely. The vote was unanimous, though several members clearly harbored doubts about the path they were choosing. Within hours, classified orders were transmitted to every human military installation and research facility in the Sol system. The Great Expansion, as historians would later call it, began not with fanfare or formal declarations, but with the quiet launch of automated construction ships towards 17 carefully selected star systems beyond Council oversight. Each ship carried the blueprints for a complete industrial base, defensive installations, and the capability to support human colonies. More importantly, each ship carried a quantum communication array that would allow instant coordination across interstellar distances. The Council's monitoring stations detected nothing unusual. The ships used the same quantum tunneling drive technology that had made the reconnaissance probes invisible, and their launch trajectories were carefully designed to appear as normal asteroid mining operations. By the time the first construction ships reached their destinations, humanity had already committed to a path that would reshape the galaxy. But they had no idea how quickly the Council would discover their activities, or how the discovery would trigger a chain of events that would validate every fear the Council had harbored about human nature. In the depths of space, automated human factories began converting raw asteroids into shipyards, communication relays, and defensive platforms. Each installation was designed to be self-sufficient and mutually supporting, creating a network that would be nearly impossible to eliminate through any single action. And in the hidden command centers beneath Earth's surface, human strategists worked around the clock to prepare for the day when their secret would inevitably be discovered. That day came sooner than anyone expected. The discovery was made not by Council sensors, but by a Zephyrian exploration vessel that happened to be investigating unusual quantum fluctuations in what they believed to be empty space. When their sensors detected massive artificial structures in a system that Council records indicated was uninhabited, the exploration team's reaction was precisely what human psychologists had predicted. They immediately reported to the nearest Council outpost and waited for instructions rather than investigating further. Within 6 hours, the report had reached the highest levels of Council leadership. Within 12 hours, emergency sessions were being called to address what appeared to be the first act of open defiance of Council authority in over 3 millennia. Ambassador Veltar, now promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations, reviewed the sensor readings with growing dread. The human installations were impressive, sophisticated, and clearly designed for both industrial production and military defense. But what terrified him most was their positioning. They formed a strategic network that could support rapid expansion into dozens of additional systems. "How many installations?" asked Council Prime Zethkri, the ancient energy being who served as the Council's ultimate authority. "At least 17 that we've detected so far," Veltar replied. "But Prime, the positioning suggests this is only the beginning of a much larger expansion plan. And these were built without Council knowledge or approval?" "Completely. Our monitoring of the Sol system showed no unusual activity. They must have developed stealth technology that we failed to detect." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. When Zethkri finally spoke, their harmonic voice carried an edge that Veltar had never heard before. In 12,000 years of Council governance, no species has ever attempted such a blatant violation of territorial restrictions. The implications for galactic stability are profound. Prime, I recommend immediate diplomatic contact. Perhaps this is simply a misunderstanding, or an emergency response to some threat we're unaware of. Very well. Contact the human government. Inform them that Council representatives will be arriving at their primary world within 72 hours to discuss this situation. But even as Veltar began drafting the diplomatic communique, he suspected that humanity's response to the Council's demands would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Because humans, as he was beginning to understand, had a very different concept of negotiation than the rest of galactic civilization. They viewed it not as a process of finding acceptable compromise, but as an opportunity to explain why their position was non-negotiable. The Council delegation arrived at Earth exactly 72 hours after their announcement, their massive diplomatic vessel emerging from hyperspace with the kind of precise timing that demonstrated both advanced technology and bureaucratic efficiency. The ship itself was a masterpiece of cooperative galactic engineering. Crystalline sections contributed by the collective, energy-dampening fields provided by the Zephyrians, and quantum-stable hulls designed by the Rigelian Assembly. What the Council representatives didn't realize was that their arrival had been detected and tracked from the moment they entered the Sol system. Human deep space sensors, invisible to Council technology, had monitored their approach and transmitted detailed scans to every human installation within 50 light-years. Admiral Kim stood in the primary briefing room of Lunar Base, studying the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. "How many ships?" "Just the one diplomatic vessel," reported Captain Martinez from the tracking station. "But it's massive." Initial scans suggest a crew of several hundred, plus extensive communication equipment. "And our stealth deployments?" "All 17 installations remain undetected. The Council ship sensors are focused on known human territories. They're not scanning for quantum tunneling signatures in unclaimed systems." Kim nodded. The humans had one significant advantage in this confrontation. The Council genuinely couldn't comprehend the scope of what humanity had accomplished. Their worldview simply didn't accommodate the possibility that a supposedly contained species could have secretly expanded across dozens of star systems. "Admiral," said Director Chen, reviewing intelligence reports from Earth, "the diplomatic team has requested a meeting on neutral ground. They want to use the same station where first contact occurred." "Absolutely not," Kim replied without hesitation. "This meeting happens in the Sol system, on terms we dictate. Send a response. They can meet with our representatives aboard the diplomatic vessel currently approaching Earth orbit." Chen looked concerned. "Admiral, that's a significant breach of galactic diplomatic protocol. They'll see it as aggressive." "Good," Kim said flatly. "Because that's exactly what it is." "Chen, The moment we agreed to meet them on their terms, in their space, using their protocols, we would have already lost this negotiation. They need to understand that humanity doesn't consider itself subject to Council authority. The response transmitted to the Council vessel was diplomatically worded but unmistakably firm. Humanity would be happy to meet with Council representatives, but the meeting would occur aboard the human diplomatic ship Endeavour, currently approaching from Earth orbit. The Council's reaction was immediate and telling. For nearly an hour, their vessel remained motionless while they apparently debated this unprecedented breach of galactic diplomatic tradition. No species had ever demanded that Council representatives come to them. When they finally responded, their message carried undertones of confusion and barely controlled frustration. The Council accepts humanity's invitation, though we must note that this departure from established protocols is highly irregular. Perfect, Kim murmured, watching the tactical displays. Confused opponents make mistakes. The Endeavour was humanity's most advanced diplomatic vessel, though calling it purely diplomatic would have been misleading. Like everything humans built after first contact, it served multiple purposes. Its diplomatic sections were indeed luxurious and well-appointed, but its hull incorporated advanced armor plating. Its engines could outrun anything in the Council fleet, and its defensive systems could engage multiple targets simultaneously. More importantly, it was equipped with the most sophisticated sensor arrays and communication systems humanity had ever developed. Every word spoken during the coming meeting would be recorded, analyzed, and transmitted instantly to human command centers throughout known space. Ambassador Veltar materialized aboard the Endeavour via Council teleportation technology, accompanied by 3 other senior Council members and a small security detail. His first impression was disturbing. The ship felt wrong somehow, as though it had been designed by minds that approached problems from completely different angles than normal galactic engineering principles. The walls incorporated too much metal, the lighting was harsh and direct rather than soothing and ambient, and the entire atmosphere suggested functionality prioritized over comfort. Even the artificial gravity felt somehow aggressive, as if the ship was pushing against the universe rather than harmonizing with it. Ambassador Veltar, said General Williams, who had come out of retirement specifically for this meeting. Welcome aboard. I trust your journey was comfortable. General Williams, Veltar replied, noting that Williams appeared to have aged considerably since their last meeting. The Council appreciates your willingness to meet with us. Our pleasure, Williams said, though his tone suggested anything but pleasure. If you'll follow me, we have a conference room prepared. The walk through the ship's corridors confirmed Veltar's growing unease. The human crew members they passed were alert, professional, and clearly military despite their diplomatic uniforms. More troubling were the subtle signs of advanced weapon systems built into the ship's infrastructure. This wasn't a diplomatic vessel that could defend itself in emergencies. It was a warship disguised as a diplomatic vessel. The conference room itself was deliberately intimidating. The main display showed a real-time tactical view of the Sol system, with human installations, ship movements, and defensive positions clearly marked. The message was unmistakable. Humanity was not defenseless, and they wanted the Council to know it. General, Veltar began, the Council has become aware of certain activities that appear to violate the territorial agreements established during our first contact. I assume you're referring to our expansion into previously unclaimed systems? Williams replied casually. Yes, we're aware that you've discovered some of our installations. The casual admission stunned the Council delegation. Veltar had expected denials, explanations, perhaps even apologies. He hadn't expected humans to simply acknowledge their violation of Council authority as if it were perfectly reasonable. General, surely you understand that such expansion without Council approval represents a serious breach of galactic law. Williams leaned back in his chair, his expression growing cold. Ambassador, I think we need to clarify something fundamental here. Humanity never agreed to be bound by galactic law. We agreed to accept Council guidance during the probationary period, but we never surrendered our sovereignty or our right to self-determination. Councillor Thakmore, the Regellian representative, clicked his carapace in agitation. The distinction is meaningless. All spacefaring species accept Council oversight. It is the foundation of galactic civilization. Maybe, Williams said, but humans aren't all other species. And frankly, Ambassador, the more we've learned about your galactic civilization, the less attractive Council membership has become. Veltar felt his ceremonial robe shifting to concerned orange. General, what do you mean by that? Williams activated the conference room's holographic display, showing detailed images of various Council species, homeworlds, and social structures. We've done our research, Ambassador. We know what Council membership requires. Genetic modification to eliminate aggressive tendencies. Social conditioning to prioritize consensus over individual initiative. Technological restrictions to prevent the development of weapons or defensive systems. These are the foundations of galactic peace, Councillor Zafira protested, her gaseous form swirling with distress. No, Williams replied firmly. These are the foundations of galactic stagnation. You've created a civilization where everyone is so afraid of conflict that no one is capable of growth, innovation, or self-defense. The display shifted to show scans of the mysterious ships that human probes had detected moving toward the galactic rim. Tell me, Ambassador, are you aware that unknown vessels with advanced technology are approaching this region of space? The reaction from the Council delegation was immediate and telling. Veltar's robes flashed through several colors of alarm, while Councillor Thekmore's clicking became rapid and agitated. How did you? Veltar began, then stopped himself. How did we detect them when your monitoring systems didn't? Williams finished. Because we've been looking outward while you've been looking inward, because we develop our technology to explore and defend rather than to monitor and control. Director Chen stepped forward, activating additional displays that showed the full scope of human intelligence gathering. We know about the quarantine species, Ambassador. We know what happens to civilizations that refuse to accept domestication. And we know that those unknown ships represent something your council is either unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge. The Council delegation exchanged what appeared to be rapid communications through their universal translator interfaces. When they finished, Veltar's voice carried a note of desperation that surprised Williams. General, you don't understand the dangers of the path you're choosing. Galactic civilization has existed in peace for millennia precisely because we've eliminated the factors that cause conflict. Competition, territorial expansion, military development, these things lead inevitably to war. Maybe, Williams acknowledged. But, Ambassador, in our experience, the elimination of all possibility of conflict doesn't create peace. It creates helplessness. And when something truly dangerous comes along, something that doesn't share your commitment to peaceful coexistence, helplessness gets you killed.
Williams stood, walking to a viewport that showed the Council's diplomatic vessel hanging in space nearby.
We're not interested in conquering other species or disrupting your peaceful civilizations. But we're also not interested in giving up our capacity to defend ourselves, or our right to expand into unclaimed territory. The territory you've occupied is not unclaimed, Councillor Thekmore protested. It falls under Council jurisdiction by default. Says who? Williams turned back to the delegation. Show me the treaty. Show me the law. Show me anything other than your assumption that you have the right to dictate terms to every species you encounter. The silence that followed was profound. Because, of course, there was no such document. The Council's authority derived entirely from the voluntary submission of species that chose peaceful integration over alternatives they considered worse. General, Veltar said finally, are you saying that humanity rejects Council authority entirely? I'm saying that humanity rejects any authority we didn't choose to accept, Williams replied. We're willing to coexist peacefully with Council species. We're even willing to cooperate on matters of mutual interest. But we will not surrender our sovereignty, our right to expand, or our capacity for self-defense. Councillor Zafira's form swirled with what her species indicated as deep distress. This is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to galactic war. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, military build-ups, these are the patterns that destroyed countless civilizations before the Council established order. And what happens when order isn't enough? Williams asked. What happens when something comes along that doesn't care about your Council's authority? Something that sees your peaceful civilizations not as examples to emulate, but as resources to exploit. He reactivated the display showing the mysterious vessels. Because that's what's heading this way, Ambassador. And your response to potential external threats has been to eliminate your own capacity to resist them. Director Chen stepped forward with additional intelligence reports. Our analysis suggests these vessels are conducting systematic resource surveys of uninhabited systems. Their technology signatures indicate capabilities far beyond anything we've seen from Council species. And their movement patterns suggest they're not exploring, they're preparing. Preparing for what? Veltar asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Colonization, Chen replied. Large-scale territorial expansion into regions they consider suitable for their needs. And Ambassador, based on their survey patterns, one of those regions is the Galactic Rim, where Earth is located. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The Council's peaceful civilization was potentially facing an external threat that wouldn't be deterred by diplomatic protests or territorial restrictions. Even if your analysis is correct, Councillor Thekmore said slowly, the solution is not military expansion. The solution is to bring this matter to the Council for proper deliberation and coordinated response. Williams laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Councillor, how long would such deliberation take? Your species pride themselves on consensus building and careful consideration. Meanwhile, those ships are moving at relativistic speeds toward inhabited systems. The Council has protocols for emergency situations. Veltar protested. I'm sure it does, Williams replied. But tell me, Ambassador, when was the last time the Council actually faced an emergency? When was the last time any Council species had to make a decision under pressure with incomplete information while potential enemies approached their territory? The silence that followed answered the question more clearly than any words could have. This is the problem with your galactic civilization, Williams continued. You've created a system that works perfectly as long as everyone agrees to follow the rules, but you've eliminated your capacity to respond to anyone who doesn't. He walked back to the tactical display, highlighting human installations throughout the local region. We haven't expanded into Council territory, and we haven't threatened any peaceful civilizations. But we have established the infrastructure necessary to defend our species and our interests. Because, in our experience, the time to prepare for conflict is before it becomes unavoidable, not after. Veltar's robes were now cycling through colors that indicated profound confusion and distress. General, surely you can see that this approach threatens the stability that has preserved galactic peace for millennia. Ambassador, Williams said quietly, what if that stability was always an illusion? What if the only reason galactic civilization has remained peaceful is because nothing truly dangerous has threatened it in millennia? The question struck at the heart of everything the Council believed about their society. For thousands of years, they had assumed that their peaceful approach to civilization represented an evolutionary advancement beyond the primitive conflicts that characterized pre-spacefaring species. But humans were suggesting something far more disturbing. That galactic peace existed only because no one had seriously challenged it. The Council will not permit humanity to continue this expansion, Councillor Thekmore declared, his voice carrying the authority of billions of civilized beings. Williams turned to face the delegation, his expression hardening. Councillor, you're welcome to try to stop us, but I think you should consider very carefully whether you want to discover what happens when you attempt to use force against a species that hasn't forgotten how to fight. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time in their recorded history, the Council was facing a species that openly defied their authority and possessed the apparent capability to resist enforcement. This meeting is over, Veltar announced, his diplomatic training finally overriding his shock. The Council will deliberate on this matter and respond accordingly. Ambassador, Williams said as the delegation prepared to leave. There's one more thing you should know. Veltar paused, dreading whatever additional revelation was coming. Those installations you've discovered? They're not our main expansion. They're our early warning system. Williams smiled that unsettling human expression. Our main expansion is much larger, much more distributed, and much harder to detect. But we felt you should know what you're really dealing with before you make any decisions about how to respond. The Council delegation departed within minutes, teleporting back to their vessel with barely concealed urgency. As their ship disappeared into hyperspace, Williams turned to Director Chen. Well, he said, that went about as well as we could have hoped. Admiral Kim won't be pleased, Chen observed. We've essentially declared independence from the Council without actually saying the words. Good, Williams replied. Because now we'll find out what the Council does when someone refuses to be domesticated. And based on their reactions today, I don't think they know either. In the depths of space, automated systems aboard human installations began receiving updated tactical parameters. The confrontation phase was beginning, and humanity was about to discover whether their refusal to accept galactic authority would lead to freedom or to the kind of war that would make their species' violent history look like a peaceful disagreement. But in the hidden command centers where human strategists planned for every contingency, one fact provided grim comfort. Whatever was coming, they would face it as humans, with all the terrifying implications that contained. The Council's response came exactly 96 hours after the failed diplomatic meeting, delivered with the kind of bureaucratic precision that had characterized galactic governance for millennia. It arrived as a formal declaration transmitted simultaneously to every human installation, every monitoring station, and every major communications hub in the Sol system. The message was brief, decisive, and utterly devastating in its implications. By unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, humanity is hereby classified as a rogue civilization. All human territorial claims beyond the Sol system are declared invalid. All human installations in unclaimed space are ordered to cease operations and submit to Council oversight. Compliance is required within 72 standard hours. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Admiral Kim read the declaration 3 times before setting it aside and activating the emergency command protocols that had been prepared for this exact scenario. Within minutes, encrypted communications were racing across space via quantum relay, reaching every human outpost, military installation, and civilian colony beyond Earth's solar system. The message was simple. Condition read: execute Fortress Protocol. All personnel to wartime status immediately. What followed was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of the expected panic, confusion, or attempts at further negotiation, humanity's response was swift, coordinated, and terrifyingly efficient. Every human installation that the Council knew about immediately went dark, their communications ceasing and their activities becoming undetectable to Council sensors. At the same time, dozens of previously unknown human facilities suddenly activated across the galactic rim, revealing an expansion network far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The Council had discovered 17 human installations. The reality was closer to 200. Impossible, whispered Council Prime Zefkri, their harmonic voice distorting with shock as the reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The logistics alone. How could they have built so much without detection? Ambassador Veltar, now serving as emergency coordinator for the crisis, studied the incoming data with growing dread. Prime. They've been planning this for years. Every installation is strategically positioned to support the others. They're not just random colonies, they're components of an integrated military network. The scope of human preparation became clear over the following hours. Mining operations that had appeared to be simple asteroid extraction were revealed to be massive industrial complexes. Scientific research stations were actually military shipyards. Communication relays were targeting systems for weapons platforms that the Council had never detected. Worst of all, the quantum tunneling drive technology that had made human expansion possible also made their ships essentially immune to Council sensor networks. Humanity could move forces anywhere in the galaxy without the Council knowing until they chose to reveal themselves. Prime, Beltar continued, our military advisors report that standard Council containment protocols are insufficient for this situation. Human defensive positions are designed to require overwhelming force to eliminate, and they're positioned to provide mutual support across interstellar distances. Then we will apply overwhelming force, Zethkri replied, their harmonics carrying an edge of frustration that shocked the assembled Council members. How many ships do we need? The answer, when it came, represented another unprecedented moment in galactic history. The Council had never fought a war. Their entire military doctrine was based on containment and isolation, not conquest or destruction. They simply didn't have experience with the kind of sustained military campaign that humanity's defensive network would require. Prime, reported Admiral Kethvak of the Regelian Assembly. Our analysis suggests that eliminating the human installations would require deploying approximately 60% of all Council military assets for an extended campaign lasting several months. And the cost in lives? Veltar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Conservative estimates suggest Council casualties in the tens of thousands, assuming human resistance follows normal patterns for galactic civilizations. It was Councillor Zephyra who raised the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. What if human resistance doesn't follow normal patterns? The question hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Every Council member knew humanity's history. They had reviewed the psychological profiles, the cultural analyses, the military assessments. Humans didn't surrender when defeated. They regrouped and counterattacked. They didn't accept reasonable losses. They escalated until the enemy could no longer sustain the conflict. Prime, Veltar said carefully, there is one additional factor. Our intelligence services have detected massive human fleet movements towards the galactic rim. They appear to be positioning forces in response to those unknown vessels we discussed. The external threat, Zethkri's harmonics, shifted to confusion. Are humans actually preparing to defend against an unknown alien force while simultaneously defying Council authority? It appears so, Prime. Their defensive positions are oriented both inward toward Council space and outward toward the approaching unknown fleet. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just defying the Council. They were preparing to fight a two-front war against both galactic civilization and an external threat that the Council barely acknowledged. "This changes nothing," Zethkri declared. "Human defiance cannot be permitted to stand. If we allow one species to reject Council authority, others may follow. The stability of galactic civilization depends on universal acceptance of our governance." The decision was made, orders were transmitted, and within hours the largest military fleet in galactic history began moving toward human space. 700 council ships from dozens of species, carrying weapons designed to contain or destroy entire star systems, advanced with the kind of methodical precision that had maintained galactic order for millennia. The first engagement occurred at a system designated by humans as Outpost 7, a relatively small installation that appeared to be primarily a communications relay. Council forces expected light resistance from a minimal defensive garrison. What they encountered was unlike anything in their military experience. The human facility was indeed small, a single orbital platform around a minor asteroid, but as the Council fleet approached, the asteroid itself began moving, revealing that the entire rock had been converted into a mobile weapons platform. Defensive systems that had been invisible to Council sensors suddenly activated, filling space with energy fields, missile swarms, and kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the human installation had been destroyed, but the cost was appalling. 12 Council ships had been eliminated. 37 more were damaged beyond immediate repair, and the survivors reported that human defensive systems had demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything in Council databases. They turned an asteroid into a warship, Admiral Kethvak reported, his carapace clicking with agitation. The entire facility was a trap designed to inflict maximum casualties on attacking forces. But worse news was coming from across the galactic rim. As Council forces attacked known human installations, new human facilities were appearing in previously empty systems. For every installation the Council destroyed, humans seemed to activate 2 more. Prime. Veltar reported during an emergency session, human military doctrine appears to be based on what their historical records call defense in depth. They're not trying to hold specific positions, they're trying to inflict maximum casualties on our forces while preserving their own combat capability. "Are they retreating?" asked Councillor Thekmore. "No, Councillor. They're advancing. While we attack their outer installations, they're expanding deeper into unclaimed space. Every battle we win is revealing the existence of additional human positions we didn't know existed." The truth was even worse than the Council realized. Human military planning had anticipated exactly this scenario. The installations the Council had discovered were primarily decoys and early warning systems. The real human expansion was occurring through a network of mobile facilities, asteroid bases, space platforms, and converted ships that could relocate faster than Council forces could track them. More disturbing was the human approach to warfare itself. Council military doctrine was based on efficient elimination of specific targets with minimal collateral damage. Human doctrine appeared to be based on maximizing enemy casualties regardless of cost to themselves. "They're not fighting to win," reported Admiral Kethvak after the 7th engagement. "They're fighting to make the war so costly that we'll seek a negotiated settlement." "Is it working?" Zethkri asked grimly. "Prime, we've destroyed 43 human installations in 2 weeks. Our casualty reports show over 8,000 Council personnel dead or missing, with nearly 300 ships damaged or destroyed. And intelligence suggests we've encountered less than 10% of human military assets." The casualty figures sent shockwaves through the Council chamber. In 3,000 years of galactic governance, total Council military casualties from all conflicts combined hadn't exceeded 5,000. Humans had inflicted more casualties in 2 weeks than the Council had suffered in millennia. Surely they must be suffering equal or greater losses, Councillor Zephyra asked desperately. "Unknown," Admiral Kethvak admitted. Human installations are designed to be destroyed. They appear to evacuate critical personnel and equipment before our forces arrive, then use automated systems to inflict maximum damage during our assault. We're fighting their machines, not their people. But the most disturbing revelation came from the intelligence analysts who had been studying human tactical patterns. "Prime," reported Dr. Velthek, the Council's senior xenopsychologist, "human military behavior suggests they view this conflict not as a discrete war with specific objectives, but as the beginning of a permanent state of hostility." Explain. "Every action they take is designed not just for immediate tactical advantage, but for long-term strategic positioning. They're not fighting to resolve this conflict. They're fighting to establish their capacity to fight indefinitely.
The implications were terrifying. Council warfare was based on the assumption that rational beings would seek the earliest possible resolution to any conflict.
But humans appeared to be approaching the war as if it were a natural state that would continue for decades or centuries. Their supply lines are self-renewing. Dr. Velfek continued. Their bases are designed to rebuild themselves. Their personnel rotation systems assume permanent deployment. They're not planning for victory or defeat, they're planning for persistence. It was Veltar who finally voiced what everyone was thinking. Prime, what if we can't win this war? The question was heretical. The Council had never lost a conflict because they had never fought a species capable of sustained resistance. Their entire military philosophy was based on overwhelming superiority applied against isolated opponents. We have 700 ships, Zefkri protested. They have perhaps 50 installations. That we know of, Veltar interrupted. Prime, every engagement reveals additional human assets we hadn't detected. Their actual military capacity is unknown, but their demonstrated ability to inflict casualties on our forces is beyond anything we anticipated. The debate that followed lasted hours and reached no clear conclusions. The Council was facing a dilemma that their civilization had never encountered. An opponent that couldn't be contained, couldn't be intimidated, and couldn't be defeated through conventional means. But the decision was made for them by events beyond their control. The unknown fleet that human sensors had detected months earlier chose that moment to enter Council space. 30 massive vessels, each larger than anything in the Council fleet, appeared simultaneously in a dozen systems and began what could only be described as systematic conquest. The aliens, later designated as the hegemony by human intelligence, showed no interest in communication or negotiation. Their ships simply appeared, eliminated all resistance, and began converting entire worlds into industrial facilities of unknown purpose. Prime, came the desperate transmission from the Andromedian home system. We need immediate military assistance. Unknown alien forces have occupied 3 of our colony worlds and are approaching the core systems. Similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The external threat that humans had been preparing for was not only real, but far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And the Council's response revealed the fundamental weakness that humans had identified in galactic civilization. When faced with an enemy that wouldn't follow their rules, the Council had no effective response. Recall the fleet, Zefkri ordered desperately. We need those ships to defend Council space. Prime, Veltar said quietly. The humans predicted this. The silence that followed was profound, because suddenly, everything humans had said during their defiant confrontation was proving accurate. They had prepared for external threats while the Council focused on internal control. They had maintained military capabilities while the Council pursued pacification. They had refused to be domesticated while the Council eliminated their own capacity for resistance. Contact the humans, Zefkri, ordered finally. Inform them that the Council requests their assistance in dealing with the external threat. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council had requested help from a species they were officially at war with. But as reports continued to arrive of hegemony victories and Council defeats, one fact became clear. Humanity hadn't been defying galactic civilization. They had been preparing to save it. Because humans understood something that the Council had forgotten in their millennia of peace. Sometimes the only way to preserve what you value is to be willing to fight for it. And humans, as the galaxy was about to discover, were very, very good at fighting. 4. The human response to the Council's request for assistance came within 6 hours, delivered by a single ship that appeared in Council space using technology that made their quantum tunneling drives look primitive by comparison. The vessel materialized directly outside the primary Council station without triggering any of their supposedly impenetrable defense systems. Ambassador Veltar materialized aboard the human ship with a delegation that included Council Prime Zefkri themselves. An unprecedented break with diplomatic protocol that demonstrated just how desperate the situation had become. What they found waiting for them was not what they expected. The ship's commander was Admiral Sarah Kim, the compact woman who had overseen humanity's secret expansion. But she was not alone. The conference room contained representatives from every major human faction, including several individuals whose very presence sent shockwaves through the Council delegation. Prime Zefkri, said General Williams, who should have been retired but was wearing the uniform of the newly formed Human Defense Coalition. Admiral Kim, Dr. Chen, and I believe you know Colonel Mitchell. Mitchell had been promoted, Velton noted. He now wore the insignia of humanity's supreme military commander.
a rank that hadn't existed during their first encounter, but apparently had become necessary as human forces expanded across the galaxy.
General Williams, Zethkri replied, the harmonic voice carefully controlled. The Council appreciates humanity's willingness to discuss the current crisis. The current crisis, Williams repeated with that unsettling human smile. Is that what we're calling it? Because from our perspective, we're looking at the complete vindication of everything we've been saying for the past 5 years. Admiral Kim activated the conference room's holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. The images were stark and terrifying, dozens of Council worlds under hegemony occupation, entire sectors cut off from communication, and a pattern of conquest that suggested systematic preparation rather than opportunistic expansion. The hegemony has occupied 47 Council worlds in the past 3 weeks, Kim reported with military precision. Their technology is approximately 2 centuries ahead of anything in the Council fleet. Their tactics suggest a unified command structure with extensive intelligence about Council capabilities and weaknesses. How extensive? Zethkri asked, though their harmonics suggested they already feared the answer. Dr. Chen stepped forward, activating additional displays that showed detailed analyses of hegemony ship movements and attack patterns. They knew exactly which Council military assets to target first. They avoided heavily defended systems initially, instead focusing on industrial and communication centers. They're not just conquering territory, they're systematically dismantling the infrastructure that allows the Council to function as a unified government. The implications were staggering. The hegemony wasn't simply an external threat seeking territory or resources. They were demonstrating a comprehensive understanding of galactic civilization that suggested long-term observation and planning. They've been watching us, Veltar realized. All of us. For years, possibly decades. Longer, Williams confirmed grimly. Our intelligence suggests they've been conducting reconnaissance for at least a century. They know everything about Council military doctrine, political structure, technological capabilities, and social weaknesses. Social weaknesses? Councillor Thakmore clicked nervously. Your complete inability to respond effectively to unexpected threats, Colonel Mitchell said bluntly. Your reliance on consensus building when rapid decisions are required. Your assumption that all conflicts can be resolved through negotiation. The silence that followed was profound, because everything Mitchell was saying was proving accurate. The Council's response to the hegemony invasion had been hampered by exactly those factors, endless debates about appropriate responses while enemy forces advanced, attempts to establish communication with aliens who showed no interest in dialogue, and a fundamental inability to comprehend that some conflicts could only be resolved through superior force. What do you know about them? Zethkri asked finally. Hegemony. What do they want? Admiral Kim activated another section of the display, showing detailed scans of hegemony installations on conquered worlds. They appear to be a spacefaring civilization that practices what our historians would recognize as imperial expansion. They identify suitable territory, eliminate existing inhabitants who can't be integrated into their system, and convert the resources to support their continued expansion. But surely they can be reasoned with, Councillor Zafira protested. All intelligent life must share some common values. Councillor, Williams interrupted. They've been exterminating entire populations on conquered worlds. They're not interested in coexistence, integration, or negotiation. They want the territory and resources that Council civilizations control, and they see the current inhabitants as obstacles to be removed. The display shifted again, showing intercepted hegemony communications that human intelligence had managed to decode. The translations were fragmentary, but their meaning was clear. The hegemony viewed the galaxy's peaceful civilizations not as fellow sentient beings, but as inefficient resource utilizers whose elimination would improve overall galactic productivity. They're not evil, Dr. Chen explained. Evil implies malice. They're practical. They've identified the galaxy as suitable for their expansion, and they're methodically clearing out what they see as inferior competition. Can they be stopped? Zethkri asked desperately. Yes, Mitchell replied without hesitation. But not by the Council. The blunt assessment hit the chamber like a physical blow, because it was obviously true. The Council's peaceful civilizations had been systematically defeated by an enemy that didn't share their commitment to avoiding casualties or respecting civilian targets. The Council fleet has lost approximately 40% of its combat effectiveness, Admiral Kim continued. Your remaining ships are designed for containment and defensive operations, not for the kind of sustained offensive campaign that would be required to dislodge entrenched hegemony forces. What about your forces? Veltar asked. Human military capabilities have proven more extensive than we initially understood. Williams smiled again, but this time the expression was genuinely pleasant rather than threatening. Ambassador, we've been preparing for exactly this scenario since our first contact with the Council. We knew that galactic civilization's peaceful nature would make it vulnerable to external threats that didn't share your values. The display shifted to show human military assets across the galaxy. The scope was breathtaking. Not the 200 installations the Council had detected, but over 1,000 facilities, shipyards, defensive platforms, and mobile fleets positioned throughout unclaimed space and hidden in systems that Council surveys had deemed uninhabitable. Our strategic assessment, Admiral Kim continued, suggests that human forces can successfully engage hegemony assets on roughly equal terms. Their technology is superior, but our tactical doctrine is designed to neutralize technological advantages through superior strategy and willingness to accept casualties they consider unacceptable. Are you saying you can defeat them? Zethkri asked. We're saying we can fight them, Williams corrected. Victory depends on factors we can't control. How many ships they have, how quickly they can reinforce their positions, how committed they are to this particular expansion. But yes, we can fight them effectively. And the cost? Veltar asked, remembering the casualties that human resistance had already inflicted on Council forces. High, Mitchell admitted. Human military doctrine accepts casualty rates that Council civilizations would consider catastrophic, but that's exactly why we're capable of fighting this enemy when you're not. Chen activated another display, showing psychological profiles of the different civilizations involved. The hegemony expects Council species to surrender when casualties reach a certain threshold. It's a reasonable expectation based on your historical patterns, but humans don't have such thresholds. We escalate until the enemy can no longer sustain the conflict. The question, Williams said, looking directly at Zethkri, is what the Council is willing to pay for human assistance in this war. There it was, the negotiation that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The Council needed human military capabilities to survive the hegemony invasion. But humans had already demonstrated that they would not accept subordinate status in the galactic hierarchy. What are your terms? Zethkri asked. Williams exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. Complete human sovereignty over all territory we currently occupy or may occupy in the future. Recognition of human territorial claims throughout the galactic rim. And most importantly, permanent exemption from Council authority for humanity and any other species that chooses to ally with us rather than submit to Council governance. The terms were breathtaking in their scope. Humanity was essentially demanding the right to establish an independent galactic power that would exist alongside the Council rather than beneath it. You're asking us to abandon the principles that have maintained galactic peace for millennia, Councillor Thakmore protested. We're asking you to acknowledge that those principles only work when everyone agrees to follow them, Williams replied. The hegemony has demonstrated that external threats don't care about your commitment to peace. If you want to survive, you need allies who are capable of fighting. Veltar found himself thinking about the psychological assessments his people had conducted of human nature. Every analysis had reached the same conclusion. Humans viewed conflict as natural, compromise as temporary, and submission as unacceptable. They were asking the Council to accept partnership with a species that fundamentally rejected the philosophical foundations of galactic civilization. And if we refuse, Zethkri asked, then you'll face the hegemony.